basket is under review.
It's July, but the college basketball world never sleeps. I am off to Vegas here in a couple days for EYBL and NBA Summer League. But Fawcett, I know that a lot of the attention globally, and certainly from college coaches as well. Many of them made the trek to Istanbul, as I was seeing on their Instagram stories throughout the last couple of weeks. Was the U17 FIBA World Cup. Huge event, great event. Again, essentially, these guys are the same age as the majority of the guys playing EYBL. There's a handful of 18-year-olds in EYBL, but consider this kind of like for the uninitiated college hoops observer. Consider the U17 World Cup sort of global peach jam, if you will, and college coaches certainly taking attention there. But I think the thing that was certainly unique about this year's event is that there were two guys playing in it, and two guys that have already been gaining a ton of steam, a ton of attention in college basketball circles. But two guys playing in it who had monster weeks, who are headed to college this season. They're going to be 2-year college guaranteed. They won't be NBA draft eligible until after their sophomore seasons. One, we already know officially where he is headed. Joaquim Boumtje Boumtje, he is officially off to Duke. His star has certainly grown in the last couple of weeks and months. As a guy, who is seen very much as like a incredible long-term prospect, who now seems like an incredible now prospect. And then Nikola Kusturica, who has gotten a lot of attention late. Michigan was recruiting him at the end when Dusty May left. Kentucky dangled big money. It now, all accounts are that he is headed to UCLA. My sources, I guess that would make it basket under review sources for the purposes of this podcast, would tell you that he is almost assuredly a Bruin, but working through some contract details. We'll see when that officially becomes reality. But those two guys perceived as potential top 5, potentially number 1 picks in the 2028 draft, but incredibly young, right? I mean, very much pushing the bounds of what is realistic to play college basketball, particularly in an era where, teams are skewing older and older, right? I mean, Kusturica, for instance, this is a guy who is several months younger than Cooper Flagg was when he played college basketball, right? All we heard, you remember, Foss, all we heard was, man, 17-year-old Cooper Flagg, 17-year-old Cooper Flagg. Well, what if we scaled that up by several months? I mean, this is a guy who will play the entire college season as a 17-year-old, turn 18 next April, end of April, and then Boumtje Boumtje in a similar boat, someone who was born in May of 2009, even a bit younger than Kusturica. So really unprecedented stuff. And so we thought the best way to do it was to dive into the film, show you what they're good at now, show you where they need to continue to grow, show you what might be functional in college basketball this year and what might not be. And then try to help you guys have a better understanding, like what's realistic for this guy. Are these all conference players? Are they national players of the year? Are they role players? Are they bench players? Like, what are they adding to a team this year and beyond? So excited about this one. And I know, Fawcett, you enjoyed getting to see some of these, elite young talents as they, start to really make a name for themselves on the global scene.
Yeah, it was fun to see kind of the difference between these two players we're talked about, just in the sense that Boumtje Boumtje is someone that a lot of people knew the name. They know his father. He's got a catchy name. You commit to Duke, of course, that's going to get all kinds of attention. So it felt like kind of going into the U17s, everyone knew who Boumtje Boumtje was. And of course, there's like, look, he's tall and he dribbles and, look at how he moves. And that's always going to get attention. And Kusturica, there was far less hype. Like you said, there was still plenty of interest within the industry, I'll say, but maybe the casual fan didn't know. And then maybe a little bit of role. He, of course, played a little bit bigger of a role for his team versus Boumtje Boumtje. But kind of everyone, I feel like, came away from the U17s being like, oh man, like, this Kusturica guy, he might be the one. So that was kind of fun to see how going in, it was kind of like Boumtje Boumtje was the one that everyone was really, really excited for. Now it's Kusturica. Maybe. I mean, I'm sure there's still, we can argue, but it felt like his hype was most kind of grown from this. And I do appreciate you continuing to frame this around like these are 17-year-old guys, because of course, something we've talked about many times on the show, and we will continue to do so. It's always a frustration when people treat European recruiting, quote unquote, as like a monolith. And a lot of the Europeans we will often talk about, or impact guys that come to college from Europe, are 21 or 22 years old. And these guys are not that. They are much, much younger. And I am sure if any of these guys even has a slow start, we are going to see certain media people be like, see, this is why you never know what you're going to get from Europeans. And I'm sure we will get that. And I almost look forward to it in a, morbid, cruel way. But it does become very interesting in what do you expect this year? What do you expect next year? What do you expect from them eventually in the NBA? Not that we as much talk about that. And then I do think just market wise, this is fascinating. This is something that Sweeney, you and I have talked about for a couple of years, and you hear a little bit of talk about this in the industry, but maybe not as much as there should be, about like multi-year contracts, essentially, with this being the perfect candidate for it. Someone who, like you mentioned, these two players who cannot go to the draft after this, they will be in college for 2 years. So can you lock these guys up, and what value do you put on maybe that first year where they're still getting their feet under them versus what the second year could be? And obviously not a European player, but Jaden Quaintance was someone who was kind of on the same timeline where it's like, this is going to be a 2-year college player. And I thought it was going to be very interesting to see who would land him right out of high school, knowing that he would be a 2-year college player. Now, of course, with injuries, his career, we never really saw what that would be, but I thought that was going to be a really interesting test case in what value do you bring in getting these guys to college early, and these guys that have they're just 2 years before they're NBA eligible. Well, now this is going to become a really interesting study with these two players, both of which you kind of play a different style, are naturally gifted athletically and with size, but definitely play a different style. And I'm excited to get into the film here, and I'm very excited for the fall to see them in college.
Yeah, so both guys will sign or have signed 2-year contracts. Boumtje signed a 2-year deal per my sources. My expectation, and from what I've been told, is almost assuredly will happen when and if Kusturica signs with UCLA. That will be a 2-year contract. And there's like a 2-year, $12 million offer circling. I'm told that's not quite accurate, but certainly very lucrative. And same for Boumtje. Lots of money on the line here. And yeah, you're locking in a guy. You're guaranteeing having him in your program in 2027, 28. That's huge on its own, let alone what they could do this season. Because those guys, I think I will come across in this video, just warning everyone, very skeptical, like extraordinarily skeptical of what any 17-year-old will do in college basketball, right? I'm happy to be wrong if they are such incredible talents, they out-achieve that. But I would not temper my expectations at all for what these guys will be as more traditional freshmen, as 18-year-olds. They have a chance to be awesome. The film certainly does not lie there. So let's start with Boumtje. And I think this is an interesting one because, this is a guy that, when talking to people who are familiar with his recruitment, people who had watched him play in USA basketball in the past, they sold it to me as like, yeah, this guy's going to go to a blue blood and basically redshirt. Like, he's probably not going to play much at all as a freshman. And then, as a sophomore, this is like a foundational piece potentially. And that has, obviously, the expectations have changed some with the way that he has played of late, to the point where now you are seeing people talk about him as a potential starter at power forward for Duke this year. And someone I know, Terrence Oglesby, who both of us respect and enjoy his commentary, he said he thinks this guy wins ACC Player of the Year. Like, I do not, I am nowhere near there. I'm curious where you're at, but this has been a fascinating rise, and a lot of it has to do with his play at the ANGT, and then certainly at USA Basketball. We're with the USA national team at the World Cup. So let's dive into the film here, Fawcett.
Yeah, it's always interesting when looking at players this young, just to kind of look at the results versus the eye test of how it looks, because with Boumtje, the results are often there when it's like, hey, watch this guy bang threes, watch this guy take step backs and knock down shots, and the way he handles the ball. And is it the smoothest mechanics all the time? Is it the most clean ball handling? No, but he still has really good size and athleticism making these plays at a young age. And it also became a little bit of a challenge watching him at some of the levels. You're going to see some of the Spanish under 18 league here. You're going to see some Adidas next gen tournament, of which there are some very talented teams, some less talented teams, but a lot of these plays, you know, there is a little bit of like herky jerkiness. There's a little bit of awkwardness, but like the results are there. Now, how that equates to like, is this going to be the ACC player of the year? It's hard because like, yeah, like the results are here against lesser competition, but it doesn't always look great. Now, to see the way that he actually was a legit pick and roll ball handler, even at these higher levels playing in the Adidas Next Gen tournament, of course, going to Duke, it makes you wonder about like, okay, well, can they use him like Boozer, where they allowed him in big moments to be this ball handler? And while I don't think that Boozer was like the greatest pick and roll operator, he was capable. And when you're capable and at the power forward spot, you're playing in situations where teams are not used to guarding it and you can have success. So that's the other piece of it out there is like, do you want the ball in his hands and do you want him to be a playmaker, or do you want him to do this? And this is one thing I do love about Boumtje Boumtje, and it's what a lot of these unicorn type prospects don't do. I know, you know, people always yelled at Porzingis, or they yell at Holmgren, or they yell at, like, they just want these guys sometimes to like get on the block and overwhelm someone with length. And like Boumtje Boumtje will do that. And I think that that's something that like a lot of people will appreciate, that while he can handle, while he can take these shots, like there's times where he's like, hey, if we need a bucket, I'm gonna go bully someone, and they can use him as a screener, and he will be the typical lob threat screen guy. And that's where I think he projects a little bit better when he just enters immediately into the Duke system, when Duke needs to win games, is like, he can be a guy that's like, hey, if a team's going to try to guard you small, we're just going to go bully you. Hey, if we want to really feature a guard and pick and roll, Boumtje Boumtje can be the pick and roll guy, and that's going to be effective. Now, I did want to throw back to something we talked about on the defensive end earlier in the year. And these were like clips that people looked at like, oh, look at Boozer, he's a bad defender. But this was something we talked about, which a lot of NBA teams are doing, where they just always help off the four, and the four just becomes the help defender always. And that's where you saw Boozer playing this kind of like free safety role where he was always in the paint. Now that did result in some guys getting catch and shoot opportunities. This is where it'll be interesting for Boumtje, where it's like, hey, he has that length and potential to be that shot blocker. Now, it's also interesting, Sweeney, because to me, when I was watching his defensive film, I was ready for something, you know, outstanding. I was waiting for some incredible block shots. You don't always see that with him. The anticipation isn't quite there yet. The processing isn't quite there yet, but man, the physical tools just allow him to make plays. Now, when we're watching these block shots and some of these defensive clips I did find, like, again, their results are good, but it's not often like, this isn't like the shot eraser with amazing anticipation. Someone who seems to be reading the play kind of one step ahead. And again, it's also funny. We're often used to talking about guys that are, you know, we'll talk about like the best players in the transfer portal and what they're going to do at their next stop, or like guys that we're expecting to be first team All-American. Where are the holes? Like, yeah, we're talking about a guy who's like 16 in some of these clips. So like when I say the anticipation is not there, I'm not saying it's never going to be there, but just at this exact moment, is this guy going to be the ACC player of the year? Yeah, I would stop short of that. But he is someone who I think is going to have some incredible flashes, someone who I do think has utility right away as a role player, someone who can make shots, someone that will bully switches or smaller matchups, and someone that can play as the screener in the role game. But, you know, longer term, absolutely, I see it. But yeah, this is someone that Duke makes a big investment in to, of course, get some production right away, and then hopefully an absolute mountain of production in year two. I see the vision there for sure, and it will be kind of fun if he kind of gets to showcase for a year role player capabilities, and can he be like a super role player, and then maybe next year we see a little bit more of that pick and roll stuff and creation and shooting off the dribble. That's kind of my thought. But yeah, seeing some of those clips, I know it's not your first time watching him, but I know I threw a whole bunch your way, but curious any takeaways you have.
Yeah, it's funny. The more I think about Boumtje Boumtje, the more I think about a young Karl Towns, where you saw like, oh man, like this guy has amazing tools. He's super long. He's skilled. And like the production defensively sort of ebbed and flowed. And I think what solidified Cat as such an incredible prospect in college was that the shot blocking really came along. And, you know, in the NBA, he's been more of a tweener, but you know, that was really, I think, what moved the needle with Cat at Kentucky. And I'm curious to see whether that happens for Boumtje Boumtje, because that also impacts his kind of positional designation, right? I think because of the skill level, he's viewed by most as a 4, and he's also played a lot of 4 because he's played with other really good bigs. For instance, like this year with Barcelona, in some of the lower levels, he's playing with other giant guys, and then even in the FIBA tournament, he's playing the 4 next to Eric Dampier's son. So it's fascinating to see, like, does he back up Gangba some? Does he play the 4 with Duke? And I think the defense will be a big part of that. The other thing with Boumtje Boumtje, like, this all doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Like, you're going into Duke and you're competing with Cam Williams, who is a top 5 player in the high school class, but Cam Williams is also super raw. And like, if we do a video on him at some point, which we may, this guy, like, there's some moments where it's like, holy cow. And there's some moments where it's like, man, this guy's like not very good. And I'm Boumtje Boumtje may win the job sort of by accident, without Duke planning it, because he's just better than Cam at this stage. And I think Cam's going to take some time. They also have Charnowski coming in from Belmont, who's a very good player who can play maybe some 4, some 5. Boumtje Boumtje can play some 4, some 5. You have Gangba, who's phenomenal, but not always healthy. What's his status? How many minutes can he play? They try to limit him. So he's certainly a nice piece to add to your front court, right? Like, any opportunity you get to add like a guy who can move like this, that has skill, that has feel for the game, that is produced. And again, approaching Boozer levels, again, it's very early and he hasn't had the same body of work, but like, yeah, you just look up and like, yeah, this guy has somehow wound up with 20 and 10 again. Like, that is how the FIBA stuff felt. That's how some of the ANGT stuff felt. And if that continues, obviously he's going to be phenomenal. So yeah, I would say my projection for him would be fringe starter. Maybe beats out Williams, maybe doesn't, plays a real role this year, and then potential superstar, one of the best players in the sport in 27, 2028. But yeah, I mean, it's cool to have him, certainly. And again, if you're Duke, like, to be able to develop him in house with all the resources they have at their disposal. Not that Barcelona is some rinky dink operation, but to give him a year where he's experiencing the college game, I think will be beneficial for him long term. So looking forward to that. And then there's Kusturica, again, a guy whose star has really grown. Had a very good has had a very good summer, spring and summer. U17 numbers were phenomenal. Showed more playmaking, scoring than I think we had seen in the past. Again, some really impressive stuff here of late. When he was at the next gen stuff, he was hurt for some of that, so didn't have the full tournament, but very impressive in spurts. It's an exciting guy, and enters a situation at UCLA, assuming that's where he ends up, where like he's really needed, right? This is a team that needs pop on the wings. They have a good team around him, so he doesn't have to be the guy, but he certainly has to be a guy. And he will not, again, the $12 million number is not right, but like, it's not going to be free to have him on the roster. Let's put it that way. They're going to spend a significant amount of money to have him on this team. I'd really love to have him, and love to have him be a starting caliber guy. Fascinated to see what you think, and maybe some comparisons we can draw as well.
Yeah, so he's another one that's fun. Like, the fun thing about looking at these younger players is seeing the development that happens like so much more rapidly even. So when you look at some of these clips that are about like 9 months old, again, you're seeing him knock down these shots. You're seeing some of the ball handling, but like we talked about with Boumtje Boumtje, like some of it are like the results are there, but not everything looks super fluid. But the one thing I always loved about him was his ability to change speeds and decelerate and slow down and then show burst. Someone who has great feel, great touch passing. But again, there was always times he looked a little bit like a young deer, just like getting used to the like long limbs. And you watch some of the results and you're like, okay, it looks a little bit awkward, but like, man, he's getting to spots, he's beating guys, he's making the right play. And then someone who is not super or just content to get to the jump shot all the time and be just a pull-up player, someone who has a lot more downhill pressure than a lot of times what you see from these taller ball handler types. And it's something that even in recent drafts, some of these, again, American players that are taller, like wing types, a lot of the times people don't love that, like, okay, these are just like tall jump shooters and we don't love seeing that. like Kusturica, someone who still like loves to get downhill, uses the dribble to get places, loves to finish at the rim, and like plays more physically than what you think. Now, this is one player that you might remind you of. That's right. We are throwing it back to third division Germany several years back. This is Franz Wagner, and someone who I thought looked a little bit similar. You mentioned this to me first, and I was glad to watch this and see like, wow, this is someone who also like doesn't always look like the absolute quickest first step, but like someone who doesn't always look like the smoothest, but you're just like, oh man, he is still just like getting by people. He is making shots. He is getting to the rim. And of course, in retrospect, it's crazy to see at this level. He was like playing in the third division of Germany. Here he got up to the first division, got a couple of minutes, but you see a lot of the same clips and you're like, okay, Kusturica looks a whole lot like this Wagner guy who went on to be a very good college and NBA player. And I think this is something too, when you look at some of those clips we saw from early in the season in Adidas Next Gen to now watching last week at the U17 World Cup, like watch how much more confident he looks with his dribble, watch how explosive he looks, and watch how everything is connected. Watch those changes of speed. Watch the way his footwork is timed up with his handwork and what he's doing with the ball. And this is where I start to see like, okay, now this is someone who I think could be impactful at a very high level right now in college. And a lot of these situations, a lot of these kind of individual scoring, pick and roll ball handler, like I could totally see this working at the college game right now at the highest level. And it'll be interesting exactly to see how this guy who is largely an individual creator, ISO score, ISO creator, what that looks like at UCLA and what Cronin is looking for is really interesting. But at the same time, like you've watched all these clips, like this is how he plays. If UCLA identified this guy, like they better give him the reins here and let him cook, because I think he could take advantage of a whole lot of matchups and be really, really effective. So I don't know exactly what, national perception is of this guy in terms of what he'll be right away. I do think he's going to be a big time scorer. I really like what I'm seeing. And I think he's ready to be a kind of key offensive piece in the Big Ten right away. And I think the only thing that might get in the way of that is like, just, who knows what Cronin is looking for from him. Who knows exactly what the defense is going to look like. Again, that's something about playing for Barcelona, just being the most talented team, kind of overwhelming a lot of matchups and winning every game by 30, whether it be in Spanish, the Spain under 18 league, or in Adidas Next Gen. It was tough for me to find defensive clips that I thought were particularly notable. That's why I didn't share any, but maybe that gets in the way, and that's where he looks younger. But when it comes to like polished individual playmaking, I think he's totally ready. So really, really fun to watch his stuff. And I can see why a lot of people learned his name recently.
Yeah. And the UCLA connection, I think, is fascinating because, one of their top assistants and top international recruiter is Yogi Ivanovic from Serbia, right? So there's a connection there, and I think we've talked. I think it was the UCLA Donovan Dent video that this came up, like fit in terms of relationship, location, etc., versus fit basketball wise, and I think you're right. Like what does his game look like in mixed system and in a world where he is not allowed to be the best player, right? Like, look, this guy could be very, very good. They have good players on this team, right? Like this is going to be like a very funny, like take to look back on if this guy's like a top 5 pick and like a superstar talent and all these things. But like, I don't know, man, like Jalen Petty's got shots to get up. Like Trent Perry's got shots to get up. Like this team was built. Eric Daly is like a multi-year starter in this program. Like this team is already built somewhat, and they were leaving room for that high level wing if they could find it. It seems like they have. But I also don't think it was like, let's clear out and let Nikola do whatever he wants. I also think like he's going to make mistakes. 17 years old. Like this is a lot to put on him. And so, fascinating to see how his game evolves. I think the Franz comp is great. And I want to give credit to Kyle B from the Discord. I know he brought that up, and that was something that resonated. And now I've, kind of locked in on. I think it's perfect. And as both in terms of style of play, I do think Nicole is a little bit more dynamic with the ball in his hands than Franz was. He has a little bit more game, but it's very similar in terms of like super young guy, of limited high level experience, mostly playing for youth national teams and youth development programs, etc. Came in, was a starter year one, and then year two became a top 10 pick. Yeah, I think that's totally possible, right? It's a very real story here. Maybe he's the fourth or fifth starter on a good team at UCLA, just like Franz was, excuse me. And then year two, he takes off. That'll be fascinating to watch. But yeah, I just worry that the style doesn't necessarily translate, and that like this is like I actually think it'd be a good example of like another year in Europe might have helped him, right? Because he probably would have been knocking on. He was knocking on the door this year. He's playing real minutes here and there with the senior team. Like, did he have a path to doing more with Barcelona and like learning how to play a role more effectively, right? I think Dame Sar and Ivan Karchenkov had more experience with the senior team, and they were more ready, I think, to not be the best player. And I know we say that a lot with American guys, but it's true with Europeans as well. Like, this guy loves to pound it. He will not have the freedom he had with the U17 Serbian team when he shows up to play for Mick Cronin. So it's gonna be very, very interesting. But yeah, I mean, they need him to be a starter, and I think he certainly has a path to. And I think he's smart to go to a place where he can start, right? Like, if you're gonna make this move, it shouldn't be to like come off the bench, right? Go play, go get an experience, go get reps, go get experience at the highest level. And I think he has a chance to do that at a very high level.
Yeah, and that's where there's like what's good for the team and also what's good from the player side, because you saw the style of play of Kusturica, like, and that's one of those things that, like, if this doesn't work out and he doesn't thrive in the stuff he needs to do as a secondary or tertiary scorer and being a role player, like, it would be pretty quick to just go look at all his film from overseas and say, like, well, like, UCLA, what did you think you were getting? Like, while it's not like the largest sample size because it's a young player, it's still like this is the stuff he has put on tape pretty much exclusively. So we do see that in the portal sometimes, and you and I have talked about it, where some of these guys that play a certain style and go somewhere and continue to play the same style, and the team's like, oh, well, this isn't what we needed. It's like, well, you've got to do your work scouting. So that's just the natural piece, where I don't know if off the jump I would have been like, oh yeah, this is clearly a UCLA player, but UCLA is clearly putting good resources behind it, something short of the reported number, but it's really interesting. And then it also is interesting from a UCLA standpoint, or any other team looking at doing this, is like, okay, well, if you need maybe someone to be a starter but be your third or fourth option offensively, do you just like go pay up to get the best isolation scoring 17-year-olds at the forward spot? Like, it's interesting there, and how you allocate your resources there. And again, how do you allocate it for this year versus like, okay, well, maybe we want him to be a role player this year when we're trying to win, and then we want him to be one of our best players in year two where we're also trying to win because it's the high major level of college basketball. That becomes really interesting, and that's where this multi-year piece is fascinating. And that's also, if you're Kusturica's camp, being like, okay, we are going to be in college for 2 years, presumably, at the minimum. Do we want our first year to be at a mid-major plus, where maybe make $750 or $1 million, but have a huge role, and then go up and play or do we want to lock in the dollars and play? Like, do you want to do what Abdallas does and go to like a Virginia Tech, as opposed, like, it's also very interesting from like the player standpoint. I know we often, Sweeney and I, we are often talking more about like how teams view this process and what like teams should be looking to do. This almost becomes also very interesting from the player standpoint of what the player camp should do. But this will be a fascinating study either way between both Kusturica and Boumtje Boumtje. I'm really happy to see it, and I'm curious to see how it develops. And I also even, some of the pieces in this film we're probably going to even be talking about in a couple of years. You mentioned the centers that Boumtje Boumtje was playing next to, and 14-year-old Mohamed Debone was one of them. So this will probably not be the last time we're talking about some Barcelona and European 17-year-old types that are going to come over for multiple years. So is this the next wave at the top of the sport? We will see. Perhaps how these two players do will help inform that.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing I would say with Kusturica is, like, think about it this way. And this is something I've come to understand from talking to people around Mick Cronin. Like, Mick as the coach really, really, really values continuity. He really, really values retention. Like, he values, like, he would much rather pay a guy he's coached than pay a guy than pay a guy in the portal. And so you probably pay a little bit of a tax on year one of the Kusturica deal to have him in your program. And then you pay him he will be paid like a superstar college basketball player in 27, 28. And in that process, you get the year of familiarity with Mick. And presumably, if this marriage isn't up to snuff, there will be ways out of the contract, whether that be buyouts, whatever. And also, I mean, like the money is too real on the back end to not find a way to make it work for both sides, right? Like if this is not working for him at UCLA, like they will find a way out because they have, 100, they will make hundreds of millions in the NBA, more likely than not. He's a real chance to do that. So intrigued certainly by the marriage, but I think it makes a lot of sense to try to, put yourself in that position to have retention, and he gives them an opportunity to do that. So it's gonna be awesome to watch. More talent coming to college basketball, whether that be 23-year-olds or 17-year-olds. I think it's largely good for the product. Within reason. But yes, more good players, the better. I'm all about it. So, any closing thoughts, or shall we wrap it up, Fawcett?
No, I think I just love your thought there of I love when teams actually kind of practice what they preach in terms of spending money with what's important. Like, how often do you hear coaches say like, oh, like we want unselfish players, and then you go see the players that they go spend all their money on in the portal and they're maybe selfish players, or coaches that say like, hey, we only care about defense, and then you go and see the players that they go spend their money on in the portal, and their values don't always seem to be aligned with the way that they actually spend their money. So for Cronin, if he's saying behind closed doors, or if he's saying like, hey, continuity is important, well, this is a move that actually shows it is truly important. They are following that up with action. So I'm just always happy to see programs doing that, and I think that if this works, maybe that's the lesson for a lot of coaches. That's like, hey, if you really think like something matters, whatever that is, like your NIL money should probably follow what you value. Your money should probably support what you value. So to hear you say like, Cronin really cares about continuity, I'm like, well, I truly believe that, where oftentimes coaches will say that they truly believe in stuff, they truly value stuff, their actions don't follow it. So that'll be big too. And just like what the value is on continuity has already been somewhat of an interesting discussion in NIL with returning players. But now that you've got the opportunity to truly lock it in with players that will not go to the draft, with players that will be in on contracts with, like you said, probably some outs if needed, but probably are going to be there 2 years. Yeah, it could very well be the next thing that changes the way rosters are built. So super interested to see it.
Definitely. Awesome. We will be back with more Scout Team next week.